My stepfather kicked me out at 18 for being gay. Now he's begging me to save his business after I became a millionaire. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but after what happened last week, I need to get this off my chest. This is about my stepfather Richard, who destroyed my teenage years, kicked me out of the house for being gay, and is now desperately trying to get back into my life because I'm successful. The karma is so perfect, it almost doesn't feel real. Let me start from the beginning. My biological father died in a car accident when I was 8 years old. My mom, Sarah, was devastated and struggled as a single parent for 3 years before she met Richard Thompson at her work. He seemed like a godsend at first. Stable job, nice house, charming personality. Mom was so grateful to have someone who wanted to take care of us that she ignored a lot of red flags. Richard worked as a regional manager for a construction company and made decent money. He owned this big house in the suburbs with a 3-car garage and a pool. When Mom married him when I was 11, it felt like we'd won the lottery. We moved from our tiny apartment into his mansion, and for a brief moment, I thought I was getting the father figure I'd always wanted. That illusion lasted about 6 months. Richard's true personality came out gradually. He was controlling, demanding, and had very specific ideas about what it meant to be a real man. He was obsessed with traditional masculinity, sports, hunting, working with your hands, never showing emotion. He'd grown up in rural Texas with a father who probably never hugged him once, and he was determined to raise me the same way. The problem started when I was 12 and showed no interest in the activities Richard considered important. I didn't want to play football or baseball. I wasn't interested in learning to hunt or fish. I preferred reading, drawing, and spending time on the computer learning about web design. To Richard, these were signs that I was becoming soft and needed to be toughened up. He started signing me up for sports without asking my opinion. When I performed poorly or showed that I wasn't enjoying myself, he'd lecture me about effort and commitment. He'd make me run laps around the yard as punishment for not trying hard enough. He'd take away my books and art supplies, saying I needed to spend more time on man activities. My mom went along with most of this because she was terrified of losing another relationship. She'd make half-hearted attempts to defend me, but whenever Richard put his foot down, she'd cave immediately. I think she convinced herself that having a stepfather, even a controlling one, was better for me than having no father figure at all. The worst part was how Richard treated my interests and personality like they were problems to be solved. When I was 13, I got really into graphic design and started teaching myself Photoshop and Illustrator. I was actually pretty talented and had created some cool artwork for school projects. But when Richard found out I was spending time on computer art, he took my laptop away and signed me up for wrestling camp. Wrestling was a nightmare. I was small for my age, not athletic, and had no desire to grapple with other sweaty teenagers. But Richard was convinced that if he could just force me to be more aggressive and competitive, I'd transform into the son he wanted. When I came home from practice with bruises and complained about hating it, he'd tell me that's what building character felt like. High school was when things really escalated. I was 14 and starting to understand that I was different from other kids in ways that went beyond just my interests. I was attracted to boys, not girls, and I was terrified of what that meant for my life. I'd grown up hearing Richard make casual homophobic comments about TV shows, news stories, and people in our town. He'd use slurs regularly and talk about how that lifestyle was destroying American families. I spent my freshman and sophomore years desperately trying to hide who I was. I'd force myself to talk about girls I supposedly liked. I'd pretend to be interested when Richard would point out attractive women and expect me to comment. I even went to a few school dances with female friends, trying to convince everyone, including myself, that I was straight. But Richard seemed to sense something was off. He'd make pointed comments about my lack of girlfriends. He'd ask invasive questions about whether I was getting anywhere with girls. He started pushing me to date more aggressively, even offering to give me money to take girls on expensive dates. The more pressure he put on me, the more anxious and miserable I became. The breaking point came during my junior year when I was 16. I'd been chatting online with other gay teenagers in forums and chat rooms, trying to understand my identity and connect with people who felt the same way I did. I thought I was being careful about hiding my activity, but Richard had installed monitoring software on my computer without telling me. One evening, he called me into his office and confronted me with printouts of my chat logs. Pages and pages of conversations where I'd talked about being gay, my fears about coming out, my struggles with accepting myself, my most private thoughts and feelings laid out on his desk like evidence in a criminal trial. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the papers at me. "You want to explain to me why you're talking to a bunch of perverts online about being gay?" I was mortified and terrified. I'd never felt so exposed and vulnerable. I tried to deny it at first, claiming the conversations were fake or that I was just curious. But Richard had done his homework. He'd read everything and knew I was lying. "Don't you dare lie to me," he said. "I've read every sick conversation you've had with these people. You're telling them you're gay, talking about boys you like, asking for advice about coming out. This is what you've been doing instead of focusing on becoming a man." I broke down and admitted the truth. I told him I was gay and that I'd been struggling with it for years. I begged him not to tell my mom yet because I wasn't ready. I promised I'd try to change if he gave me time. I was desperate and would have said anything to make the situation go away. Richard's reaction was worse than I'd expected. He didn't yell or scream. Instead, he got very quiet and cold, which was somehow more frightening. "You're not gay," he said. "You're confused because you've been spending too much time with weirdos online and not enough time developing normal relationships. This is what happens when kids don't have proper guidance and structure." He blamed my mom for being too permissive. He blamed my dead father for not being around to provide masculine influence. He blamed society for normalizing deviant behavior. He blamed everyone except himself for creating an environment where I felt like I couldn't be honest about who I was. His solution was to completely control my life. He took away my computer, my phone, and any privacy I'd previously had. He started monitoring everything I did, everywhere I went, everyone I talked to. He signed me up for additional sports and activities designed to build character and expose me to positive male role models. He also started taking me to his church more frequently, where the pastor regularly preached about the dangers of homosexuality and the importance of traditional family values. Richard would make pointed eye contact with me during these sermons, as if the pastor's words were meant specifically for my benefit. The worst part was how he started treating me at home. Before discovering my sexuality, Richard had been controlling but not openly hostile. Now he acted like I was a disease that might infect the rest of the family. He'd make disgusted faces when I spoke. He'd move away if I sat too close to him on the couch. He'd make comments about how I needed to man up or stop acting like a girl in front of my mom and anyone else who would listen. My mom was caught in the middle and handled it terribly. She loved me and didn't want to lose me, but she was also financially dependent on Richard and terrified of causing problems in their marriage. She'd try to smooth things over by suggesting compromises that satisfied no one. She'd beg me to just try harder to fit in, as if being gay was a choice I was making to spite Richard. The psychological pressure was unbearable. I was living in a house where my stepfather saw me as broken and my mother saw me as a problem to be managed. I had no privacy, no freedom, and no hope that things would improve. I started having panic attacks and trouble sleeping. My grades suffered because I couldn't concentrate on anything except surviving each day. I tried to find support at school, but this was 2008 in a conservative suburb where being openly gay wasn't exactly accepted. There was no GSA or supportive teachers I could talk to. The few kids who were rumored to be gay were relentlessly bullied, and I was terrified of joining their ranks. The only thing that kept me sane was planning my escape. I'd always been good with computers and had continued learning web design and programming in secret at school. I started building websites for local businesses, doing the work during lunch breaks and study halls. I saved every penny I earned, hiding the money in my school locker where Richard couldn't find it. By the end of my junior year, I'd saved about $3,000 from my freelance work. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me hope that I could survive on my own if necessary. I started researching colleges with good computer science programs and generous financial aid. I was determined to get out of that house and build a life where I could be myself. My senior year started with Richard announcing new rules designed to fix me before I left for college. I had to participate in at least 2 sports per semester. I had to go on at least 1 date per month with a girl of his choosing. I had to attend church every Sunday and Wednesday, plus a weekly youth group meeting where we discussed the importance of Christian masculinity. The dating requirement was humiliating beyond description. Richard would find girls from his church whose parents thought I seemed like a nice young man. He'd arrange these awkward dinner dates where I'd have to pretend to be interested in someone I had no attraction to whatsoever. The girls were usually as uncomfortable as I was, sensing that something was off but not understanding what. One particularly awful evening, Richard arranged for me to take Jessica Morrison, the daughter of one of his business partners, to a fancy restaurant downtown. Jessica was actually a sweet girl who didn't deserve to be part of Richard's twisted scheme to convert me to heterosexuality. The entire dinner was painfully awkward, with both of us struggling to make conversation while knowing this whole thing was forced. At the end of the night, Jessica asked me directly if I actually wanted to be there. I was so tired of lying that I told her the truth, that Richard was trying to force me to date girls because he thought it would make me straight. Jessica was actually really cool about it and offered to help me fool Richard by pretending we were dating while actually just being friends. For a few months, Jessica and I had this fake relationship that satisfied Richard while giving both of us some relief from the pressure. We'd go to movies and dinner, but mostly we'd just hang out and talk about our real crushes and relationship problems. Jessica was one of the first people I came out to voluntarily, and her acceptance meant everything to me. But our arrangement fell apart when Richard started pushing for the relationship to become more physical. He'd make gross comments about whether I was making progress with Jessica and suggest romantic getaways where we'd have opportunities to be intimate. When Jessica and I continued to act like friends rather than romantic partners, Richard got suspicious. Eventually, Jessica couldn't handle the pressure anymore and told her parents she didn't want to date me anymore. Her parents were confused because they thought we were a good match, and when they pressed her for details, she mentioned that I might be gay. Word got back to Richard, and he confronted me in a rage. "That girl thinks you're gay," he said. "You've been using her to fool me while you continue with this pervert lifestyle. I'm done playing games with you. That's when he told me his ultimatum. I could continue living in his house and following his rules, including going to conversion therapy, or I could leave and never come back. He gave me 24 hours to decide. I was 17 years old, scared out of my mind, but also relieved that the decision was finally out of my hands. I couldn't pretend to be straight for another year, and I certainly wasn't going to conversion therapy. I chose to leave. My mom begged me to reconsider, but she wouldn't stand up to Richard or offer any real support. She kept saying things like, "This will all blow over, and you just need to give him time to adjust." She couldn't understand that this wasn't a phase or a misunderstanding. This was who I was, and Richard would never accept it. I packed everything I could fit into 2 suitcases and left the only home I'd known for 6 years. Richard watched me pack with satisfaction, as if my leaving proved his point about my character. He told me I was welcome to come back anytime I was ready to live like a normal person. My mom cried but did nothing to stop it from happening. I ended up staying with my friend Alex's family for the rest of my senior year. Alex's parents were amazing. They didn't ask a lot of questions, but made it clear I was welcome as long as I needed. They treated me like family and never made me feel like a burden. For the first time in years, I was living in a house where I could be myself without fear of judgment or punishment. Alex knew I was gay and was completely supportive. His parents figured it out pretty quickly, but never made a big deal about it. They just wanted me to be safe and happy. It was such a stark contrast to the environment I'd been living in with Richard that I almost couldn't believe it was real. I finished high school while living with Alex's family and working part-time jobs to contribute to household expenses and save money for college. My grades improved dramatically once I wasn't living in a constant state of stress and fear. I was able to focus on my computer science classes and continued building websites for local businesses. I applied to several universities with strong CS programs and good financial aid. I was accepted to State University with a partial scholarship that, combined with my savings and some student loans, would allow me to attend. It felt like winning the lottery. Richard and my mom came to my graduation ceremony, but sat in the back and didn't speak to me afterward. I saw Richard talking to other parents and acting like the proud stepfather, but when I walked across the stage, he didn't clap. My mom looked sad, but made no effort to reconcile or bridge the gap that Richard had created. I left for college that fall with $5,000 in savings, a partial scholarship, and a fierce determination to prove that I could succeed without Richard's support. I was angry, hurt, and scared, but I was also free for the first time in years. College was transformative in every way. I was finally around people who accepted me for who I was. I joined the LGBT student organization and made friends who understood what I'd been through. I threw myself into my computer science studies and discovered I had a real talent for programming and web development. But most importantly, I started my first serious relationship with a guy named David who was studying business. David was everything I'd dreamed of: kind, intelligent, funny, and completely comfortable with his sexuality. Being with him helped me understand what it felt like to be loved and accepted unconditionally. I also continued doing freelance web development work, but now I was able to take on bigger projects and charge higher rates. By my sophomore year, I was making enough money from my side business to cover most of my living expenses. By my junior year, I was turning down projects because I had more work than I could handle. During my senior year, something incredible happened. I'd built a website for a startup company that needed a complete e-commerce platform. The project was way more complex than anything I'd done before, but I threw myself into it and created something really innovative. The startup's investors were so impressed with my work that they offered me a job before I graduated. But here's where it gets really good. Instead of just hiring me as an employee, they offered me equity in the company in exchange for continuing to develop their technology platform. I was 22 years old and suddenly owned 15% of a tech startup with serious growth potential. The company took off faster than anyone expected. We were developing e-commerce solutions for small businesses, and our platform was more user-friendly and affordable than anything else on the market. Within 2 years, we'd grown from 5 employees to over 200, and major investors were throwing money at us. By the time I was 25, my 15% stake in the company was worth over $3 million on paper. When we sold the company to a larger tech firm last year, I walked away with $8.5 million after taxes. At 26 years old, I was financially set for life. I used some of the money to buy a gorgeous house in the city, start my own consulting firm, and invest in other promising startups. I was living the dream life I'd fantasized about during those dark years in Richard's house. David and I had moved in together after college and got engaged last year. We're planning a wedding for this fall, and we've built this amazing life together filled with travel, great friends, and work that we're passionate about. I'm happier than I ever imagined possible. Throughout all of this success, I'd had minimal contact with Richard and my mom. They'd occasionally reach out through social media or mutual friends, but I wasn't interested in rebuilding those relationships. I'd moved on and created my own family with people who actually loved and supported me. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed when my mom called me crying and begging me to meet with her. She said it was urgent and that she couldn't explain over the phone. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for coffee. Mom looked older and more tired than I remembered. She started crying crying the moment she saw me and kept apologizing for everything that had happened when I was younger. She said she knew she'd failed me and that she'd regretted not standing up to Richard every day since I left. Then she told me what was really going on. Richard's construction company was failing and they were about to lose everything. The economy had hit construction hard and Richard had made some bad business decisions that had put them deeply in debt. They were facing bankruptcy and would likely lose their house within the next few months. He's too proud to ask you himself, Mom said through tears. But I'm desperate. I know we don't deserve your help, but you're the only person we know who might be able to save us. I was stunned. The man who'd kicked me out for being gay now needed the gay son he'd rejected to save his business. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Mom went on to explain that Richard had heard about my success through mutual acquaintances and had been following my career from a distance. She said he'd even shown her articles about my company and seemed proud, though he'd never admitted it directly. He knows he was wrong about you, Mom said. He's never said it out loud, but I can tell he regrets how he treated you. Maybe if you help us, it could be a chance for our family to heal. I told Mom I needed time to think about it. Honestly, my first instinct was to laugh in their faces and walk away. Why should I help the people who'd made my teenage years miserable and kicked me out when I needed them most? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was an opportunity for something bigger than just revenge. This was a chance to demonstrate the kind of person I'd become, despite their treatment of me. I decided to meet with Richard directly. I wanted to look him in the eye and hear him ask for my help personally. If he was genuinely sorry and willing to acknowledge how wrong he'd been, maybe I'd consider helping. We met at a restaurant downtown, neutral territory where I felt comfortable. Richard looked awful, older, stressed, and defeated in a way I'd never seen before. The confident, controlling man who dominated my teenage years was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken and desperate. He started by making small talk about my success and how proud he was of what I'd accomplished, but I cut him off and asked him to get to the point. You need money, I said. Mom told me about your business problems. What exactly are you asking me for? Richard struggled to find the words. I could see how humiliating this was for him, having to ask for help from the son he'd rejected. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. We need about $200,000 to save the business, he finally said. I know it's a lot, and I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that happened. After you kicked me out for being gay, I said. Let's be specific about what happened. Richard winced but nodded. Yes, after I kicked you out for being gay. That was wrong of me. I was wrong about a lot of things. I waited for him to continue, but he seemed to think that was enough of an apology. I pushed him further. What specifically were you wrong about? I asked. I was wrong to kick you out. I was wrong to try to change you. I was wrong to not accept you for who you are. It was barely an apology, but it was more than I'd ever expected to hear from Richard. Still, I wasn't satisfied. Do you understand why what you did was wrong? I asked. Do you understand the damage it caused? Richard looked uncomfortable but nodded. I know I hurt you. I know I made your life difficult when I should have been supporting you. You didn't just make my life difficult, I said. You made me hate myself. You made me feel like there was something fundamentally wrong with me. You kicked me out when I was a minor and left me homeless because you couldn't handle having a gay son. Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, he said. I'm truly sorry for all of it. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I regret how I treated you every single day. Why? I asked. Why do you regret it? Because you need my money now, or because you actually understand that you were wrong? Both, he said honestly. I wish I could say it's just because I know I was wrong, but the truth is, needing your help has forced me to confront what I did. I've been watching your success from a distance, and I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the man you've become, despite how I treated you. There was something in his voice that sounded genuine, but I still wasn't ready to forgive him completely. What about me being gay? I asked. Are you okay with that now, or do you still think it's wrong? Richard hesitated, and I could see him struggling with his answer. Finally, he said, I don't understand it, but I've come to realize that it doesn't matter whether I understand it or not. You're my son, and I should have loved and supported you regardless. It wasn't the full acceptance I might have hoped for, but it was progress. Richard was at least acknowledging that his understanding wasn't required for my worth as a person. What about David? I asked. I'm engaged to a man. We're getting married this fall. How do you feel about that? This was clearly harder for Richard, but he managed to say, if he makes you happy, then I'm happy for you. Again, not perfect, but better than I'd expected. I told Richard I'd think about his request and get back to him. I needed time to process everything and decide what kind of person I wanted to be in this situation. That night, I talked it over with David. He was supportive of whatever decision I made, but helped me think through the implications. We talked about whether helping Richard would be satisfying or just enable him to avoid fully confronting his past behavior. In the end, I decided to help, but with conditions. I would give Richard the $200,000 he needed, but it would be structured as a business investment, not a gift. I'd become a silent partner in his construction company with the understanding that if the business succeeded, I'd eventually get my money back with interest. More importantly, I had non-financial conditions. Richard had to attend family therapy sessions with my mom to work on their understanding of LGBT issues. He had to make a public apology to me, acknowledging his past behavior and expressing support for my marriage to David, and he had to agree that David and I would be welcome in their home as a couple, treated with the same respect as any other family members. Richard agreed to all of my conditions. The therapy sessions have been awkward but productive. Richard is slowly learning to understand that being gay isn't a choice or a flaw, and my mom is learning to stand up for me in ways she never did when I was younger. The public apology was published in our local newspaper and shared on social media. It was surreal seeing Richard publicly admit his mistakes and express support for my upcoming marriage. Some people criticized him for only apologizing because he needed money, but others praised him for being willing to grow and change. Most importantly, David and I went to dinner at Richard and Mom's house last week. It was the first time I'd been in that house since the day I was kicked out 8 years ago. Richard was awkward, but genuinely trying to be welcoming. He asked David questions about his work and interests, and while the conversation was stilted, it was respectful. At one point during dinner, Richard pulled me aside and said something I never expected to hear from him. "I want you to know that I'm proud of you," he said. "Not just because you're successful, but because you're a good man. You had every right to tell me to go to hell when I asked for help, but you didn't. You chose to be better than I was, and that says everything about your character." I'm still processing all of this. Part of me is satisfied that Richard has finally acknowledged his mistakes and shown some growth. Part of me is skeptical about whether his change is genuine or just motivated by financial desperation. And part of me is proud that I was able to respond to his crisis with generosity rather than revenge. The $200,000 investment is helping stabilize Richard's business, and early signs suggest it might actually succeed. If it does, I'll get my money back and then some. If it doesn't, I'll consider the money well spent on family healing and personal growth. David and I are still planning our wedding for this fall, and Richard and Mom will be invited. Whether they actually attend remains to be seen, but the invitation will be extended. I'm hoping that continuing to include them in my life will help them continue growing and changing. I know some people will think I'm crazy for helping the man who kicked me out for being gay. Maybe they're right, but I've learned that holding on to anger and resentment only hurts me, not the people I'm angry at. By choosing forgiveness and generosity, I get to be the person I want to be regardless of how Richard behaves. The kid who got kicked out at 18 for being gay is now a millionaire who's engaged to an amazing man and has the power to help or hurt the people who once rejected him. I choose to help, not because they deserve it, but because it's who I want to be. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and responding to cruelty with kindness. Richard may have rejected me for being gay, but I refuse to reject him for being ignorant. People can change and grow, and sometimes all they need is the right motivation and support. We'll see what happens next, but for now, I'm proud of how I've handled this situation. I've proven to myself that success isn't just about money, it's about becoming the kind of person who can rise above past hurts and choose love over hate. Update 1. The wedding invitation. A lot of you asked me to update after Richard's response to our wedding invitation, so here I am. What happened was both better and worse than I expected, and it's given me a lot to think about regarding family, forgiveness, and what it really means to change. First, some context on what's happened since my last post. Richard's business has been slowly recovering with the help of my investment. He's had to make some major changes, downsizing staff, focusing on smaller residential projects instead of big commercial jobs, and being much more careful about expenses. But he's been working his ass off and seems genuinely committed to turning things around. The family therapy sessions I required have been interesting. Dr. Peterson specializes in family reconciliation and LGBT issues, and she doesn't let anyone get away with surface-level changes. Richard has been forced to confront not just his actions toward me, but the underlying beliefs and attitudes that led to those actions. In one particularly intense session, Dr. Peterson asked Richard to explain what he thought being gay meant when I was a teenager. His answers were revealing and disturbing. He genuinely believed that homosexuality was a choice, that it was caused by weak parenting or trauma, and that it could be fixed with enough discipline and exposure to traditional masculinity. "I thought I was helping you," he said during that session. "I thought if I could just make you tough enough, confident enough, masculine enough, you'd realize you didn't need to be gay. I thought I was saving you from a difficult life." Dr. Peterson helped him understand how harmful those beliefs were, not just to me, but to all LGBT people. She assigned him homework, reading books by gay authors, watching documentaries about LGBT families, even attending a PFLAG meeting to hear from other parents of gay children. To his credit, Richard has been doing the work. He's reading the books, asking thoughtful questions in therapy, and slowly beginning to understand that his old beliefs were rooted in ignorance and prejudice rather than love or protection. My mom has been going through her own process. She's had to confront the fact that her passivity and failure to protect me was its own form of harm. She's been learning to assert herself and stand up for me in ways she never did when I was younger. In our most recent session, she actually got angry at Richard, something I'd never seen her do before. He'd made a comment about hoping I'd tone down the gay stuff at the wedding, and Mom immediately shut him down. "There is no gay stuff," she said firmly. "There's just Alex being himself and marrying the man he loves. If you can't handle that, you don't deserve to be be there. I was so proud of her in that moment. It was the kind of protection and advocacy I'd needed as a teenager, but never received. Which brings me to the wedding invitation situation. David and I sent out invitations about 6 weeks ago. We're having a relatively small ceremony, about 80 people, including family, close friends, and some colleagues. It's going to be at this beautiful venue downtown with a rooftop ceremony space and a reception hall with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. We agonized over whether to invite Richard and my mom. On one hand, the progress in therapy had been encouraging. On the other hand, our wedding day is too important to risk having it ruined by family drama or uncomfortable moments. In the end, we decided to extend the invitation as a gesture of good faith. We included a note explaining that we wanted them there, but understood if they weren't comfortable attending. We also made it clear that if they came, we expected them to be supportive and celebratory, not just tolerant. Their response came in 3 parts, and each one revealed different aspects of where we stand as a family. First, my mom called immediately after receiving the invitation. She was crying happy tears and said she'd been hoping we'd include her. She asked a million questions about the ceremony, the reception, what she should wear, whether she could help with anything. Her enthusiasm was genuine and touching. "I've missed so much of your life," she said. "I don't want to miss this too. I want to be there to see you marry David and celebrate your happiness." She also asked if she could bring a guest, not Richard, but her sister Janet, who'd always been supportive of me and had been encouraging Mom to stand up for me over the years. I was happy to include Aunt Janet, who'd been like a second mother to me growing up. Richard's response was more complicated. He didn't call or respond immediately. Instead, he showed up at my office 3 days after receiving the invitation, looking nervous and carrying a manila envelope. "I need to talk to you about the wedding," he said. "Can we grab coffee?" We went to the cafe across from my office, and Richard seemed genuinely anxious. He kept fidgeting with the envelope and struggling to find words. "I want to come to your wedding," he finally said, "but I'm scared." "Scared of what?" I asked. "Scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of embarrassing you or myself. Scared of not knowing how to act at a gay wedding." His honesty was surprising. I'd expected either acceptance or rejection, not this vulnerable admission of uncertainty. "It's just a wedding," I told him. "You sit, you watch us exchange vows, you eat dinner, you maybe dance a little. It's not that different from any other wedding except we're both men. But what if people ask me about you? What if I don't know what to say? What if I mess up and call David your friend instead of your fiancé?" I realized that Richard's hesitation wasn't coming from rejection or disapproval. It was coming from a genuine fear of not being supportive enough. He wanted to do right by me, but didn't trust himself to know how. "What's in the envelope?" I asked. Richard looked embarrassed, but slid it across the table. Inside were printouts from websites about PFLAG, etiquette guides for attending LGBT weddings, and articles about how to be a supportive parent of gay children. He'd been doing research, trying to prepare himself to be the stepfather I deserved. "I know I can't undo the past," he said, "but I want to do better. I want to be someone you're proud to call family." There was something in his voice that convinced me his growth was genuine. This wasn't just about the money or avoiding conflict. He was actually trying to become a better person. "The fact that you're worried about doing it right is a good sign," I told him. "Just be yourself, but the version of yourself that loves me and wants me to be happy." We talked for another hour about the wedding, about his concerns, about what it would mean for our relationship if he attended versus if he didn't. By the end of the conversation, Richard seemed more confident. "I'll be there," he said, "and I'll do my best to make you proud." The third part of their response came last week, and it was completely unexpected. Richard and my mom requested a meeting with me and David together. They said they had something important to discuss about the wedding. We agreed to meet at our house, figuring neutral territory might be more comfortable for everyone. When they arrived, Richard was carrying a gift bag and looking nervous again. Mom seemed excited but also anxious. They sat on our couch looking like teenagers about to ask permission for something they weren't sure they should be doing. "We have a request," Mom said, "and we understand if you say no, but we wanted to ask." Richard cleared his throat. "We'd like to host your rehearsal dinner." David and I looked at each other in surprise. We'd planned to have a small, casual dinner the night before the wedding at a nice restaurant with our wedding party and immediate family. Nothing fancy, just a chance for everyone to meet and relax before the big day. "We know we don't have the right to ask for this," Richard continued, "but we want to do something to show how proud we are of you and how much we support your marriage. We want to celebrate you properly." Mom jumped in. "We've been talking about it for weeks. We want to host it at the house in the backyard. We'll hire caterers, get flowers, make it beautiful. We want David's family to see that you have family who loves and supports you." I was stunned. This was way beyond what I'd expected from them, especially Richard. Hosting our rehearsal dinner would mean opening their home to our friends and David's family, many of whom would be openly gay or LGBT allies. It would mean Richard having to play host and make speeches about supporting our marriage. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" I asked. "It's going to be obvious to everyone there that this is a gay wedding. You'll have to interact with our friends, David's family, people who might ask direct questions about your relationship with me." Richard nodded. "I've been thinking about that. I know people might ask about the past, and I'm prepared to be honest. I made mistakes, but I'm here now, and I want everyone to know that I support you completely." "What changed your mind?" David asked. "A few months ago, you were struggling with basic acceptance. Now you want to host our rehearsal dinner? Richard was quiet for a moment, then reached into the gift bag and pulled out a photo album. I've been putting this together, he said, handing it to me. I wanted to give it to you as a wedding gift, but it also explains why I want to do the rehearsal dinner. I opened the album and immediately felt emotional. The first page had a photo of me at age 11, right after Mom married Richard, looking happy and hopeful. The caption underneath read, "Welcome to the family." I should have said this and meant it. The album was full of photos from my teenage years, school events, holidays, everyday moments, but each one had a new caption written from Richard's perspective. Photos where I'd looked miserable or scared now had captions like, "I wish I'd seen how much pain I was causing," or "You deserved better from me." There was a photo from my high school graduation where I was standing alone while other kids celebrated with their families. Richard's caption read, "The loneliest moment of my life was watching you graduate and knowing I had failed you as a father." But the most powerful part was the final section of the album. Richard had included photos he'd found online from my college graduation, my first job, major achievements in my career, and recent photos of me and David together. These photos had captions like, "So proud of the man you became despite my failures," and "You found the love and acceptance I should have given you." The last page had a photo of David and me from our engagement announcement with a caption that read, "I can't change the past, but I can promise to spend the rest of my life proving that you deserve a family who celebrates your happiness." I was crying by the time I finished looking through the album. David was looking over my shoulder and I could see that he was emotional too. "This is why I want to host the rehearsal dinner," Richard said, his own voice shaky. "I want to publicly celebrate you and David. I want everyone who knows our family to see that I'm proud of you and supportive of your marriage. I want to make up for all the times I should have celebrated you but didn't." Mom added, "We want your friends and David's family to see that you have parents who love you. We know we can't erase the past, but we want to be part of your future." David and I talked about it privately and decided to accept their offer. It felt like a significant step forward in our relationship, and we wanted to give them the opportunity to prove their commitment to change. The planning process has been interesting. Richard threw himself into organizing the event with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone. He insisted on hiring the best caterers in town, researched LGBT-friendly vendors, and even asked me to review his planned speech to make sure it was appropriate. His speech draft was actually beautiful. He talked about how proud he was of the man I'd become, how much he respected David, and how grateful he was to be included in our celebration. He acknowledged his past mistakes without making the evening about his redemption, focusing instead on our love and future together. Mom has been equally involved, working with a florist to create arrangements that reflect mine and David's favorite colors and styles. She's been asking detailed questions about our friends and David's family, so she can be a good hostess and make everyone feel welcome. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Last week, Richard's business partner Mike Chen, Sarah Chen's husband, the lawyer working on the adoption lawsuit, approached Richard about featuring our story in a local business magazine. Apparently, the combination of Richard's business recovery and our family reconciliation has attracted attention as a positive story about personal growth and family healing. Richard came to me with the interview request, asking if I'd be comfortable with our story being shared publicly. He made it clear that he wouldn't do it without my permission, and that he understood if I preferred to keep our family business private. "Why do you want to do the interview?" I asked. "Because I think our story might help other families," he said. "There might be other parents out there who are struggling with having LGBT children, and maybe hearing about how wrong I was and how much better things got when I changed might help them make better choices." The idea of our story helping other families was appealing, but I wanted to make sure Richard understood what he was agreeing to. "If we do this interview, you'll have to talk publicly about kicking me out for being gay," I said. "You'll have to admit to being homophobic and acknowledge that your beliefs were wrong. People might criticize you, and it might affect your business." Richard nodded. "I know, but I think it's important. If sharing our story helps even one parent avoid making the mistakes I made, it's worth any criticism I might face." We agreed to do the interview together. The journalist, Maria Santos, was professional and thoughtful in her approach. She asked difficult questions, but seemed genuinely interested in the story of redemption and family healing rather than just drama. Richard was remarkably honest about his past beliefs and behavior. He didn't try to minimize his mistakes or make excuses. He talked openly about his homophobia, his controlling behavior, and the damage he caused to our relationship. "I was a terrible stepfather," he said in the interview. "I let my own prejudices and fears override my responsibility to love and support Alex unconditionally. I caused him years of pain and nearly destroyed our family because I was too ignorant and stubborn to accept who he was." He also talked about the process of change and growth he'd gone through, emphasizing that it required active work and education rather than just time passing. "You can't just decide to be accepting," he said. "You have to educate yourself, challenge your beliefs, and do the hard work of changing your heart and mind. It's not easy, but it's necessary if you want to have a relationship with your LGBT child." The interview is supposed to be published next month, right around the time of our wedding. Richard seems nervous but proud of his participation. He's been sharing the message with other parents he knows, encouraging them to be more accepting accepting of their children's differences. The rehearsal dinner is this Friday, and I'm cautiously optimistic about how it will go. Richard and Mom have put an enormous amount of effort into making it special, and their commitment to doing it right has been touching to witness. David's parents flew in from California yesterday, and we had dinner with them and my parents last night. It was surreal watching Richard and my mom interact with David's parents as fellow in-laws, discussing wedding details and sharing embarrassing stories about our childhoods. Richard was clearly nervous, but he was also genuinely trying to be welcoming and inclusive. When David's father mentioned how proud they were that David had found someone who made him so happy, Richard immediately agreed and shared his own pride in our relationship. "Alex is an incredible young man," Richard said. "David is lucky to have him, and our family is lucky to have David. They bring out the best in each other." It wasn't perfect. There were some awkward moments and stilted conversation, but it was respectful and warm. David's parents seemed pleased with how the evening went, and they expressed appreciation for the effort Richard and Mom were making. The biggest test will be the rehearsal dinner itself, where Richard will have to interact with all of our friends and extended family. Many of them know our history and will be watching to see if his change is genuine, but I'm hopeful that his preparation and commitment will pay off. Looking back on this whole experience, I'm amazed at how much has changed in just a few months. The man who kicked me out for being gay is now hosting my rehearsal dinner and publicly advocating for LGBT acceptance. It's not a complete transformation. Richard still has moments of discomfort and uncertainty, but it's genuine progress. I've learned that people really can change if they're motivated enough and willing to do the work. Richard's motivation came from needing my financial help, but his commitment to change has grown beyond that initial crisis. He seems genuinely committed to being a better person and a better father figure. I've also learned that forgiveness doesn't have to be all or nothing. I can acknowledge the harm Richard caused while also recognizing his efforts to make amends. I can protect myself from future hurt while still giving him opportunities to prove his growth. Our relationship will never be what it could have been if he'd accepted me from the beginning. There's too much lost time and too much pain for us to just pretend the past didn't happen. But we can build something new and better moving forward. The wedding is in 5 days, and I'm excited rather than nervous about having Richard and Mom there. They've earned their place at our celebration through consistent effort and genuine change. Whether they'll continue growing and learning remains to be seen, but for now, I'm proud of how far we've all come. Update 2. The wedding and what came after. I'm writing this from our honeymoon suite in Hawaii, still processing everything that happened at our wedding last weekend. So much happened that I almost don't know where to start, but I promise to update you all on how things went with Richard and my family situation. The short version, the wedding was absolutely perfect. Richard exceeded all my expectations, and there were some major developments that I never saw coming. Let me start with the rehearsal dinner, which set the tone for everything that followed. Richard and Mom had transformed their backyard into something magical. They'd strung lights between the trees, set up elegant tables with beautiful centerpieces, and created a perfect atmosphere for celebrating. You could tell they'd put enormous thought and effort into every detail. But the real surprise was Richard himself. I'd been worried about how he'd handle being the host of a predominantly LGBT celebration, but he was incredible. He greeted everyone warmly, made an effort to learn names and remember details about our friends, and seemed genuinely happy to be there. When David's parents arrived, Richard went out of his way to make them feel welcome. He gave them a tour of the house, showed them photos of me growing up, and talked about how proud he was of the man I'd become. It was surreal watching him play the proud stepfather role that he'd never filled when I actually needed it. The most powerful moment came during his speech. Richard stood up in front of everyone, our wedding party, both sets of parents, extended family, and close friends, and delivered remarks that left most people in tears. 8 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life, he began. I let fear and ignorance override love and acceptance, and I nearly lost Alex forever. Tonight, I want to publicly celebrate not just Alex and David's love, but Alex's courage in giving me a second chance I didn't deserve. He talked about his journey from rejection to acceptance, acknowledging the pain he'd caused and the time that had been lost. But he focused mainly on his pride in our relationship and his gratitude for being included in our celebration. Alex taught me that love is love and family is family, he said. David, you're not just gaining a husband. You're gaining a stubborn, protective stepfather who will always have your back. And Alex, you're not just gaining a husband. You're gaining your family back, permanently this time. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Our friends who knew our history seemed shocked by Richard's transformation. David's parents looked genuinely moved. Even some of Richard's own relatives, who I suspect had never heard him speak so openly about LGBT issues, seemed surprised by his words. After dinner, something unexpected happened. One of David's uncles, Jim, approached Richard to thank him for his speech and mentioned that he had a gay son who'd been struggling with family acceptance. "How did you get to this point?" Jim asked. "My son came out 2 years ago and I'm still having trouble with it. Hearing you tonight gives me hope that I can get there too." Richard spent the next 30 minutes talking with Jim about his journey, sharing resources from therapy, and offering to connect him with Dr. Peterson. Watching Richard counsel another struggling parent was surreal. He'd gone from being the problem to being part of the solution. The wedding day itself was everything everything we'd dreamed of and more. The ceremony was on the rooftop of our venue, with the city skyline as our backdrop. David looked incredible in his navy suit, and I felt like the luckiest man alive watching him walk down the aisle toward me. But what made the day truly special was seeing Richard and Mom in the family section, beaming with pride and dabbing at their eyes during our vows. Richard was wearing a rainbow pin on his lapel, a small gesture that meant the world to me. During the ceremony, our officiant asked if anyone wanted to speak about our relationship before we exchanged vows. We hadn't planned for this, but Richard raised his hand and asked if he could say something. "I don't have the right to claim credit for the man Alex has become," he said, his voice carrying across the rooftop, "but I have the privilege of watching him marry his soulmate, and I want everyone here to know how proud I am to be his stepfather." David and I were both crying by that point. The wedding photographer later told us that there wasn't a dry eye among our guests. The reception was equally magical. Richard and Mom danced together, mingled with our friends, and seemed to be genuinely enjoying themselves. Richard even danced with David's mother and had long conversations with several of our gay friends about their own family experiences. But the moment that will stay with me forever happened during the father-daughter dance portion of the reception. David danced with his father to their chosen song, and then the DJ announced that I'd be dancing with Richard. We'd practiced this once during the rehearsal, but actually doing it in front of everyone was emotional beyond words. Richard held me close and whispered apologies and affirmations while we swayed to "The Way You Look Tonight." "I love you, son," he said. "I'm so sorry it took me so long to say that." "I love you too," I replied, and meant it completely. After the wedding, David and I left for our honeymoon in Hawaii, thinking the family drama was behind us and we could just enjoy being newlyweds. But Richard had one more surprise in store. 3 days into our honeymoon, I got a call from Mom. She was crying happy tears and could barely get the words out. "Richard wants to walk in the Pride Parade," she said. "He's organizing a group from his church to show support for LGBT families." Apparently, Richard had been so moved by our wedding and the conversations he'd had with other parents that he decided to take his advocacy public. He'd approached his pastor about organizing a contingent of supportive church members to march in our city's annual Pride Parade. The pastor was initially resistant, but Richard had been persistent. He'd shared our story, talked about his journey from rejection to acceptance, and argued that the church should be leading the way in showing love and support for LGBT families. "Love is what Jesus taught," Richard had apparently said. "If we can't love and support families like Alex and David's, we're failing at the most basic part of our faith." The pastor eventually agreed, and Richard has been spending his time recruiting other church members to join him. He's also been reaching out to other parents of LGBT children, offering support and encouragement based on his own experience. "He's become like a completely different person," Mom said. "He reads books about LGBT issues, he talks to other parents, he's even considering speaking at the next PFLAG meeting." When David and I returned from our honeymoon, we found that Richard's advocacy had attracted media attention. The local newspaper wanted to do a follow-up story about his participation in Pride, and a regional LGBT organization had asked him to speak at their annual fundraising dinner. Richard was nervous about the speaking engagement, but excited about the opportunity to help other families. He'd been working on his remarks with Dr. Peterson, focusing on practical advice for parents struggling with acceptance. "I want to tell them that change is possible," he said when we met for coffee to discuss the speaking engagement. "I want them to know that you can overcome prejudice and fear if you're willing to do the work." The Pride Parade was 3 weeks after our wedding, and watching Richard march with his church group was surreal. He was carrying a sign that read, "Proud stepfather of a gay son," and wearing a t-shirt with mine and David's wedding photo on it. The crowd's reaction was incredible. People were cheering for the church group, taking photos, and thanking them for their support. Richard looked nervous but determined, and I could see how much the positive response meant to him. After the parade, several parents approached Richard to thank him and ask for advice. He spent hours talking with families, sharing resources, and offering to connect people with supportive services. He'd found his calling as an advocate for family acceptance. The speaking engagement at the LGBT fundraiser was equally powerful. Richard's speech was honest, humble, and inspiring. He talked about his mistakes without making excuses, shared the practical steps he'd taken to change, and emphasized that acceptance is an ongoing process rather than a one-time decision. "I can't undo the years I lost with Alex," he said, "but I can use my experience to help other parents avoid making the same mistakes. Every family deserves the joy I felt watching my son marry the man he loves." The speech received a standing ovation, and several audience members approached Richard afterward to share their own stories and ask for guidance. He exchanged contact information with dozens of people and has been following up with many of them to provide ongoing support. But perhaps the most meaningful development has been Richard's relationship with David. What started as awkward politeness has grown into genuine affection and respect. Richard has been making an effort to include David in family activities, remember important dates in his life, and treat him as a true son-in-law rather than just my partner. Last month, Richard surprised David by attending one of his work presentations about sustainable business practices. Richard didn't understand most of the technical content, but he sat in the front row, asked thoughtful questions afterward, afterward and bragged to everyone about his brilliant son-in-law. I never had a father figure who was proud of my work, David told me later. It means a lot that Richard is trying to fill that role. The business partnership between Richard and me has also evolved beyond our original agreement. His construction company has been steadily recovering, and he's been able to start paying back my investment ahead of schedule. But more importantly, we've been collaborating on some projects that combine his construction expertise with my technology background. We're currently working on developing sustainable housing solutions for low-income families, combining Richard's knowledge of construction with my connections in the tech world. It's meaningful work that feels like a good use of both our skills and resources. Richard has also been expanding his advocacy work beyond individual counseling. He's working with Dr. Peterson to develop a curriculum for parents of LGBT children based on his own journey from rejection to acceptance. The program will be offered through local churches, community centers, and family service organizations. I want to systematize what I learned, he explained. I don't want other families to have to figure this out on their own like I did. The curriculum includes education about LGBT identity, practical communication strategies, and ongoing support groups for parents at different stages of acceptance. Richard has been piloting the program with his church group, and early feedback has been very positive. Looking back on this entire experience, I'm amazed at how much our family has changed in less than a year. The man who kicked me out for being gay has become one of the most vocal advocates for LGBT acceptance in our community. The relationship I thought was permanently destroyed has been rebuilt into something stronger and more authentic than it ever was before. I know some people might be skeptical about Richard's transformation, wondering if it's genuine or just motivated by guilt and financial need. But I've watched him consistently choose growth over comfort, advocacy over silence, and love over fear. His change feels real because it's been sustained over time and expanded beyond our immediate family. David and I have been married for 3 months now, and every interaction with Richard reinforces my belief that people can genuinely change if they're motivated and willing to do the work. He's not perfect. He still has moments of awkwardness and uncertainty, but his commitment to being better is unwavering. The most surprising outcome of this whole experience has been how healing it's been for me. I thought I'd moved on from the pain of rejection and abandonment, but having Richard acknowledge his mistakes and work to make amends has resolved emotional wounds I didn't even realize were still open. I also never expected to become an advocate myself, but Richard's journey has inspired me to share our story more broadly. We've been speaking together at PFLAG meetings, family therapy conferences, and community events about the possibility of reconciliation and growth. We want people to know that damaged relationships can be repaired, I told an audience at a recent conference. It takes work from both sides, genuine change, and a commitment to doing better, but it's possible. Our story has also been featured in several publications focused on family reconciliation and LGBT issues. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, with many families reaching out to share their own stories of rejection and reconciliation. Richard and I have started an informal support network for families dealing with similar issues. We connect parents who are struggling with acceptance to resources and support, and we provide hope that change is possible. Alex saved my business, Richard often says when telling our story, but more importantly, he saved our family. He taught me that love is stronger than fear, and that it's never too late to become the person you should have been all along. As I finish writing this update from our beautiful life in the city, married to the man of my dreams and reconciled with my family, I'm struck by how much can change when people are willing to do the hard work of growth and forgiveness. Richard will never be the father I needed as a teenager, but he's becoming the stepfather I deserve as an adult. Our relationship is built on honesty about the past and hope for the future. It's not perfect, but it's real and meaningful in ways I never thought possible. The kid who got kicked out at 18 for being gay is now married, successful, and working alongside his stepfather to help other families find acceptance and healing. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well and choosing love over hate. People can change, families can heal, and sometimes the most broken relationships can become the strongest ones if both sides are willing to do the work. I'm proud of who I've become, proud of the family we've rebuilt, and excited about the work we're doing to help others. Life has a funny way of bringing things full circle, and I'm grateful for every twist and turn that brought us to where we are today. Final update. 1 year later. I can't believe it's been over a year since I first posted about Richard kicking me out and then begging for my help. So much has happened that I almost feel like I'm writing about a different family entirely. This will probably be my last update, but I wanted to share how everything turned out and what we've learned about family, forgiveness, and second chances. First, the business update. Richard's construction company has not only recovered, but is thriving. My initial $200,000 investment has been paid back in full, plus interest, and the company is now worth significantly more than when I first got involved. Richard has been able to hire back most of the employees he'd had to let go, and they're taking on bigger projects again. But more importantly, the company has evolved into something meaningful. Richard has shifted focus towards sustainable housing and community development projects. They're building affordable housing for low-income families, renovating community centers, and working on environmental restoration projects. I want want to build things that matter, Richard told me recently. I spent too many years just chasing profit. Now I want to leave something positive behind. The success of the business has allowed Richard to increase his charitable giving and community involvement. He's become a major donor to local LGBT organizations, family counseling services, and educational programs about acceptance and diversity. The personal transformation has been even more remarkable. Richard has become one of the most recognizable advocates for LGBT family acceptance in our region. He speaks regularly at conferences, leads support groups for parents, and has written articles for national publications about his journey from rejection to advocacy. His PFLAG chapter has grown from 8 members to over 50 under his co-leadership. He's personally counseled dozens of parents struggling with their children's sexual orientation or gender identity, helping them avoid the mistakes he made. Every parent I help is a family I'm helping to stay together, he says. Every conversation might prevent another kid from getting kicked out like Alex was. The curriculum he developed with Dr. Peterson has been adopted by family service organizations in 6 states. They're working on turning it into a book that could reach even more families dealing with similar challenges. But perhaps the most meaningful development has been watching Richard become a true father figure to David. What started as awkward politeness has evolved into genuine love and mutual respect. Last month, David's biological father had a heart attack. While he recovered fully, the health scare made David realize how much Richard's presence in his life meant to him. David actually asked Richard if he could call him Dad, something that moved Richard to tears. "I never thought I'd have a gay son," Richard said. "Now I have 2, and I couldn't be prouder of both of them." Richard has been there for David in ways his own father sometimes wasn't. He attended David's work presentations, helped him through a difficult period at his job, and provided the kind of steady, supportive presence that David had always craved from a father figure. When David decided to change careers and start his own environmental consulting firm, Richard was his first investor and biggest cheerleader. He helped David navigate the business licensing process, introduced him to potential clients, and provided office space in one of his buildings. "David is brilliant," Richard brags to anyone who will listen. "His work is going to change how we think about sustainable development." The relationship between Richard and my mom has also strengthened considerably. The family therapy sessions helped them communicate better and work as a team in ways they'd never managed before. Mom has found her voice and learned to stand up for herself and for me. She's become an advocate in her own right, speaking to groups of spouses and partners about the importance of supporting their LGBT family members, even when it creates conflict with their partners. "I lost 8 years with my son because I was too afraid to stand up to Richard," she says in her talks. "I won't let fear control my choices anymore." She's also become very close to David, treating him like the son she always wanted. They have regular lunch dates, she remembers his birthday and work anniversaries, and she's been helping him plan surprise events for me. The 3 of them, Richard, Mom, and David, have formed this unexpected alliance that sometimes leaves me feeling like the outsider in my own family, but it's the good kind of outsider feeling, where you're watching people you love care for each other. Our extended family has had to adjust to the changes as well. Some of Richard's relatives were initially uncomfortable with his advocacy work and our presence at family events, but most have come around, especially after seeing how happy and stable our marriage is. Richard's brother Mike, who used to make homophobic jokes at family gatherings, recently asked Richard for advice about supporting his own daughter who came out as lesbian. The transformation in their family dynamic has been remarkable to witness. "Richard's courage gave me permission to be brave too," Mike said at our last family gathering. "If he can change this much, maybe I can too." The ripple effects of Richard's transformation have spread throughout their social circle. Several couples in their friend group have attended PFLAG meetings, started supporting LGBT organizations, or had difficult conversations with their own children about acceptance and love. David and I have also grown from this experience. We've learned about the power of forgiveness, the possibility of change, and the importance of giving people opportunities to prove their growth. We've become speakers and advocates ourselves, sharing our story at conferences and events focused on family reconciliation. We've counseled other couples dealing with family rejection and helped facilitate conversations between estranged family members. Our story proves that relationships can be rebuilt, David often says in our presentations. It takes work from everyone involved, but it's possible to create something better than what existed before. We've also started a scholarship fund for LGBT students whose families have rejected them. The fund provides not just financial support, but also mentorship and counseling to help students navigate the challenges of being estranged from family. Richard is one of the primary donors to the scholarship fund and personally mentors several recipients each year. He helps them with practical skills like budgeting and job searching, but more importantly, he provides a father figure who accepts and supports them unconditionally. "These kids remind me of Alex at that age," he says. "If I can help them avoid some of the pain he went through, that's the least I can do." The legal work with the adoption agency lawsuit has also progressed significantly. The class action suit has now grown to include over 300 families who experienced differential care arrangements. Richard and Mom decided to join the lawsuit, not for financial compensation, but to help ensure accountability accountability for the agencies that facilitated these harmful arrangements. We were part of the problem, Richard said when explaining their decision to join the suit. We need to be part of the solution too. The lawsuit has already resulted in new federal regulations governing adoption practices and has led to the prosecution of several agency executives for child welfare violations. The monetary settlement will fund programs for adults who experienced adoption trauma and families dealing with similar issues. Richard has been one of the most vocal advocates in the lawsuit, sharing his story publicly and encouraging other adoptive parents to acknowledge their role in perpetuating harmful practices. "We can't change what we did to our kids," he said in a recent interview about the lawsuit, "but we can make sure it doesn't happen to other children." My relationship with Richard has continued to evolve and deepen. We talk regularly, work together on various projects, and have built the kind of relationship I always wished we could have. He's not the same person who kicked me out 8 years ago, and I'm not the same person who left. We've both grown and changed in ways that have made a real relationship possible for the first time. We still have occasional awkward moments or disagreements, but we've learned to communicate openly and work through problems instead of letting them fester. The foundation of honesty and mutual respect makes everything else manageable. Last month, Richard did something that surprised even me. He asked if David and I would consider him and Mom as potential guardians if anything ever happened to us. They want to be the people who would take care of our future children and continue our legacy of acceptance and love. "I know I failed you when you were young," he said, "but I want to make sure your children always have grandparents who will love and support them no matter what." The request was touching and also showed how much Richard's understanding of family has evolved.
He's thinking about future generations and wanting to break the cycle of rejection and conditional love that had characterized our family for so long. David and I are planning to start a family in the next few years, and knowing that our children will have Richard and Mom as grandparents who will love and accept them unconditionally feels like a gift I never expected to receive. As I write this final update, I'm sitting in the home office of the house David and I bought last year.
It's a beautiful place with room for the family we're planning to build and space for the work we're doing to help other families heal and grow. Through the window, I can see Richard's truck in our driveway. He's here to help David install solar panels on our roof, a project that combines their shared interest in environmental sustainability with Richard's desire to spend time with his sons. The man who once kicked me out for being gay is now installing solar panels on the home I share with my husband. The irony is perfect, but more than that, it's a symbol of how much positive change is possible when people are willing to do the hard work of growth and healing. I never thought I'd see the day when Richard would be a source of pride rather than pain in my life, but watching him speak at conferences, counsel struggling parents, and advocate for LGBT rights has shown me that people really can transform themselves completely. He'll never be the father I needed as a teenager, but he's become the stepfather I deserved as an adult. Our relationship is built on truth about the past and hope for the future, and it's stronger because we've both chosen to work for it. The scared 18-year-old who left home with nothing is now a successful adult with a loving family, meaningful work, and the power to help other people avoid the pain he experienced. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well and choosing love over hate. But more than revenge, this has been about redemption for both Richard and me. He's redeemed himself through consistent action and genuine change. I've redeemed my faith in the possibility of healing and growth. Our story proves that damaged relationships can be repaired, that people can genuinely change, and that families can heal even from the deepest wounds. It takes time, work, and commitment from everyone involved, but it's possible to create something beautiful from something broken. To anyone reading this who's dealing with family rejection or estrangement, I want you to know that healing is possible. It might not look exactly like our story, and it might take longer than you hope, but don't give up on the possibility of change and growth. And to any parents who are struggling with their children's sexual orientation or gender identity, please learn from Richard's mistakes. Love is stronger than fear. Acceptance is more powerful than rejection, and your children need your support more than they need your understanding. Choose love, choose acceptance, choose your children. The alternative, years of pain and estrangement, isn't worth holding on to prejudice and fear. Richard often says that I saved his business and his family, but the truth is, we saved each other. He taught me that people can change, and I taught him that love is unconditional. Together, we're working to make sure other families don't have to learn these lessons the hard way.